Welcome to the Committee on Housing and Homelessness Prevention. I am Senator Lindsay Port, and I call the committee to order. A quorum is present. I would first just like to take a moment to welcome Senator Doran Clark to our committee. Senator Clark, if you'd like to say a few words about your district, where you're from, and housing priorities or what's important about housing in your district.
Thank you, Chair Port. Doran Clark, I represent Northeast Minneapolis, Southeast Minneapolis, and the University of Minnesota, and Cedar Riverside. And so we are a mix of single-family homes and lots of rental and apartment units. So it's a rich mix in which we have, and I've probably most recently been out on the doors, and everyone was like, the price of housing is too high. And so that's where I'm really looking to help figure out how we do that in a whole variety of ways. So thank you for the welcome.
We're excited to have you. Welcome to the committee. I also want to, as we get started on the agenda for today, want to thank Senator Lucero for starting the conversation last week about the continuum of housing, the needs across the state, what that looks like for all different types of housing. We're going to continue that conversation today. And with some advocates who are here to talk about the housing continuum. We are going to reserve taking a closer look at the homelessness prevention portion of this committee for another time so that we can delve into that subject matter deeply. And because we have a pretty packed agenda today, we're going to dive right into it with Ann Mavity. Ann, if you'd come back or come up to the table. If you guys would both introduce yourself, the organization you work for, and you can begin with your presentation.
Thank you so much. My name is Ann Mavity, and I'm the Executive Director of the Minnesota Housing Partnership. And I'm here with my colleague today that many of you may be familiar with, Libby.
Libby Murphy. I'm the Director of Policy at Minnesota Housing Partnership. Let me know if I'm connected to the system. I'm handling them.
So I thought I'd start today just by first giving you a little bit of an overview of the Minnesota Housing Partnership itself. We've been around for 35 years working to make sure that everyone in Minnesota has a home and that there's housing solutions available and invested in. Minnesota Housing Partnership works in 3 different areas to accomplish that. One is we work in community development with rural communities and Native nations. Over the last several years, we've created more than 435 homes in partnership with these local communities. We provide sort of the staff expertise about housing that some of these communities that are too small to have that expertise on staff themselves, to identify their housing challenges and then drive to solutions. All the way up until the last funding round, we were very excited that several of the projects that we had worked with local communities on were funded and will be operating in those communities soon. We also work in research, and we provide data to inform the conversations that we're having here today. Some of our products include a State of the State's housing report. We also have legislative district housing profiles so that you can see the facts and figures of the housing experience that I'm sure all of you are hearing on the doors as you talk to people already. And then finally, we work on policy solutions to that and help work with the housing champions across the state to help drive those solutions in exactly these kinds of forums. So I wanted to talk a little bit today about sort of set the framework that we are in a system, a housing system that is not producing the housing that Minnesotans need, and that's an experience felt across the country. What's important, I think, for everyone to understand is that people feel when they're struggling so hard to get housing that that's some personal deficit, that they're not able to be scrappy enough or smart enough or quick enough to get that housing that's affordable to their incomes and their families. But the challenge is that it's a whole system failure. And it's not that individual failure that folks that you're hearing from in your districts. The other piece that's important to understand is by the data, we know that there are racial predictabilities in your housing outcomes, which have been baked into the system through intentional policies and implementation over generations. And we know that same intentionality can reverse those trends. So we like to say we need more housing of every type in every corner of the state. I'll show you some data soon in a minute here that will demonstrate that point. And we know that housing is fundamental to everything else that we do, and you have heard that and probably can recite that as well in your communities. So Minnesota Housing Partnership has a legislative agenda that we're going to touch on in a little bit with some of these solutions that include we need to maintain, save, and create new homes so that production side and preservation side of the housing continuum is absolutely essential to invest in. We need to expand home options in greater Minnesota. Sometimes the solutions that we outline don't fit as easily in all our communities across Minnesota, so we need to have targeted solutions, which we have suggestions for. We need to make sure that there's access and opportunity to housing for everyone, which includes looking at all kinds of protections for the individuals and assistance for individuals themselves, whether it's down payment, rental assistance, we'll touch on that. And then we need ongoing solutions. This whole housing system is complex. There's not a single solution, but we know that if we don't have the kinds of resources needed, we're not going to solve for the challenges that our state, our economy, our families are experiencing. So you've seen this chart probably many, many times. The reason we're in this mess is we still have not recovered from years of underproduction, so that we have not enough homes for Minnesotans right now, and we need to continue to do this catch-up in order just to keep pace with population and job growth. One of the interesting, the positive parts of sort of what the work we're all doing collectively is that our state, way back about 5-6 years ago, set out a goal to create 300,000 new homes by 2030. That was over a little bit more of a 10-year time horizon. I think Senator Draheim, you were part of that housing task force, and maybe some others as well, in really leaning into what does Minnesota need to thrive? Our businesses around the state, our families, maintaining our health, all of that. So we set this goal of 300,000 new homes. Similarly, our region has housing goals that we have set for ourselves that said for the last 10-year period that we needed 36,000 new homes just in the Twin Cities area. And when we look at what the actual results of all of these goals, well, we have it for the region, and then cities and communities, counties have their goals as well, right, of how much housing they need. But the system we're in right now is not producing that housing. So from the 36,000 goals, for example, or homes needed in the Twin Cities area over the last 10-year period, only 16,000 were created. That alone is a gap of 20,000 homes. It's a demonstration by data that our current systems are not producing the outcomes we need. And so we need to rethink what are some of these solutions, because sort of the status quo solutions are not sufficient to address what is really a growing gap and an ongoing gap. So the hard piece of this is also a focus on where the market's not working, because the market can produce so much of the housing that our state needs, which is great, and we need to release that innovation and creativity of the market itself to do that. But there's also those places where the market's not working, which is really for our extremely low-income families. And what we know is that out of 173,000 low-income families in Minnesota, we are 114,000 homes short, which means 3 out of every 10 extremely low-income families do not have a home that is affordable and accessible to them. Sometimes it's because higher-income families are renting those homes, but that squeeze is being felt, and again, I'm sure it contributes to the stories that you hear. And that undersupply in general, excuse me, that undersupply in general also means that people end up paying too much for their housing, right? That undersupply squeeze creates cost burdens on families. What we're seeing is that already a quarter of renters are paying more than they can afford for housing. And in fact, of course, it makes sense that the lowest income renters themselves sometimes are paying 80% of them are paying way more than they can afford. And again, all of that has ripple effects into our economy, into our schools and outcomes we see there. I think the hardest data point on this is that 1 out of every 5 children are living in these households that are paying too much, which means that those family budgets don't have a lot of wiggle room to cover the other costs that families need to thrive.
Senator Draheim?
Thank you. Can I ask a silly question if you go back to that one?
Yes, please.
What's the difference between the severe cost burden and the low-income renters?
So the renters overall in Minnesota, when we talk about the cost burden, it's 25% of all renters are paying severe cost burden, means you're paying more than 50% of your income for housing. And then cost burden in low-income renters says folks at 30% of our area median income. Think of it as like somewhere in the 30 to 40,000 range, depending on where you live. Our 85% of low-income renters are paying too much for housing. Is that what your question is?
Yeah, I was just
Senator
wondering
Draheim?
about how much AMI or what category you're putting each one in.
Please.
Sorry,
Ms.
I
Murphy?
think, Chair Senator Draheim, I will follow up with you. I think something got cut off on one of those. I think the one on the far right is extremely low-income renters. But we will
Just be
follow
nice
up.
to kind of know what buckets are what, and I appreciate the seniors on there because we do not talk about seniors
Yeah.
enough, so thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just note too, in your packets, the state profile from which these were drawn that was just released a couple weeks ago, the full outline of that is in your packets, hopefully as a handout in our latest housing state profile. One of the other ways we're looking at how to understand how housing and how this undersupply is impacting folks is that we track what are the top in-demand jobs. And as we look at this, and I will note for Senator Putnam, if I may, I was just talking this morning with someone from Centricare, and as we look here at the fact that home health aides, personal care aides is one of the top in-demand jobs, and I know there's hundreds and hundreds of openings at Centricare in the St. Cloud area that are unfilled, but for housing that's available for the workers that they want to hire that are within reach. And so as we look at this data all around, what we want to make sure is that that folks who are hardworking and that these are the jobs that our economy is saying we need more of, that there's housing that is within reach of those jobs for our economies and our communities to thrive. So again, you've probably seen this a lot when we look at home ownership as well. What we know is that a history of intentional policies and strategy choices generations ago have resulted today in what we see as predictable outcomes in home ownership that are not where we want to be. We want everyone to have access to home ownership, and we are putting in place strategies and solutions that can do that through down payment assistance and other ways that helps people get into the housing. And we just need to continue to have that intentionality in order to turn the tide on those trends. So where are we? Okay, so I wanted to go through, where are we on time here? 1 more minute, 2 more minutes? 2 more? So I want to go through some of our solutions that we're looking at. Our legislative agenda is also in your packets. We know that while this is a tight funding year, we know that without adequate resources, we cannot fund all the solutions that we need, and we know that there are policy solutions that need to be put in place as well. Housing infrastructure bonds are one of the key tools to invest in for the long term that we hope that this committee and your colleagues can continue to support. We know that there's a great alignment around looking at land use and zoning policies through the Yes to Homes campaign, that really is saying, let's get all these barriers out of the way that really are no cost barriers, except that they add cost and time to actually creating housing. And again, as we go through the session, we're happy to talk in detail about all of these different solutions. We want to make sure Greater Minnesota is also taken care of, that there's an intentionality to make sure that these programs are working well in Greater Minnesota, and we think that we need some tweaks in the state housing tax credit, and as well more investments in housing infrastructure to respond to that. And then finally, on access and opportunity, wanted to talk about emergency rental assistance and rental assistance in general. Both of these provide that gap to keep people housed. It's cheaper to keep people housed. Homelessness is very expensive, and how do we make sure that we're continuing to keep our eye on that? So the last thing I just wanted to note on the housing continuum broadly, that when we look across, we have put a housing continuum in your packets. It's illustrative, not exhaustive. But to understand, as you hear different speakers through the session, even today, we need solutions across the entire housing continuum, because there's not a single answer that's going to solve everything, but we have the solutions, and we appreciate all of your dedication and time in leaning into this as well. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Mavity and Ms. Murphy. I know we will absolutely have you back as we begin having zoning and land use conversations, as well as you have much more to share on those topics. I appreciate you speeding through that a bit. Members, do you have Senator Draheim?
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for the presentation, as always, and the work you guys do in housing. A couple slides ago, you had up the African-American home ownership rate and the white and Native Americans, et cetera. I'm just curious, do we have that broke down by age? Would we be able to dissect, because we've been working on this a while, at least I've been a broken record. And it would be interesting to see at what age group each one of those ownerships are. And if there's any federal statistic or something that somebody tracks and maybe the commissioner's listening to over there, and maybe they have access to it. But it would be really interesting to look at, as the generational discussion continues, are we getting better in one of those segments? So if you guys have any of that type of data, it would be interesting to take a look at it, Chair. So thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Mavity?
Yes, Senator Draheim, Chair. We can get that data. That data is available. One of the points along that, the story today is that, of course, households are forming later, right? Ownership is happening later. I will also note that we're coming out with a longer-term trend analysis on some of these, that, like, when you look at Black home ownership rates, in 1950, it was almost like, it didn't quite reach 50%, but it was almost 50%. And it's gone down. That might have been 1940, but it's gone down. And then, again, it's beginning to tick back up. Intentionality and strategies matter, but we're happy to track down that age-related disaggregation and get that back to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, members? Thank you for your presentation. Next on our list, we have Kristen and City from Habitat for Humanity. Welcome to the committee, Ms. City. Get yourself settled, and then please introduce yourself and begin your presentation.
Thank you for having me, Chairport, members of the committee. My name is Kristen Encity. I am the CEO of Habitat for Humanity of Minnesota, and it's my honor and privilege to join you today to give you an overview of Habitat's work and Habitat Minnesota today. So starting off, Habitat for Humanity of Minnesota is a statewide support organization for 24 Habitat for Humanity affiliates in the state of Minnesota. We serve 59 counties, and all of the districts that you all represent are served by a Habitat for Humanity affiliate in the state of Minnesota. Habitat Minnesota, we're an intermediary organization. We offer training, technical assistance, public policy and advocacy work, sustainability, disaster preparedness, and fundraising and lending support for those Habitat affiliates. Our goal is to try to make their work easier so that they can focus on building homes in their communities for families in those local communities who want to become homeowners. We were founded in the late 90s, 1997. We've been around for more than 20 years, almost 30 now. And since the early 2000s, we were registered as a community development financial institution. I know I've talked with many of you about the importance of CDFIs. We are a federally certified organization. We go through an annual recertification process that includes financial audit and financial review of our organization, and we're upheld to major accountability standards. Additionally, a CDFI is responsible for being accountable to the community members that we serve. So we have affiliate board members on, like affiliate executive directors on our board, and they're engaged in our community lending and program development process. So we're directly tied to communities around the state. Here's a map of the affiliates that you can see. All of these slides are in your packet that you received in preparation for today. The numbers represented there are where the home office is for those Habitat affiliates, but they serve those regions covered in green. As Ann Mavity shared, the need is great. Minnesota needs more homes. 114,000 was noted earlier. We've talked about a big number of all types and sizes, around 100,000 units across the state, and housing production is just not keeping up with demand. And Habitat serves a small portion of that, and we're working to try and do more. Particularly because homes are becoming more and more expensive across the state. Housing affordability is lower than ever, with more than 640,000 Minnesotans paying more than 30% of their income on housing. Owner income has increased by 6% in Minnesota since 2000. That's been adjusted for inflation. And the median value of homes has increased 24% over the same period. So why that matters is because the income to purchase a home is not increasing at the same rate that the cost of buying a home is. It's much greater. So wages just simply are not keeping up with the cost of becoming a homeowner in the state of Minnesota. I won't review this again, but this slide is all about the homeownership disparities across the state, as was already covered. And Senator Draheim, I think your question about age and breakdown is a really great question for us to explore further, so we'll take that back as well. So key programs from a budget and the state perspective that are important to Habitat for Humanity. We have three main policy platforms. I'm going to focus on supply, but we focus our legislative priorities on increasing the affordable homeownership supply, ensuring equitable homeownership access, so that would be homebuyer education, financial literacy, really making sure people know about how to become a homeowner, and then improving long-term homeownership security, so preserving that homeownership over a period of time. Some Habitat affiliates offer home repair programs, age in place, a variety of different things in that space. And I'm going to focus on two legislative budget priorities that Habitat has. The first one is the Workforce and Affordable Homeownership Program. This is the only program the state has that focuses solely on affordable homeownership supply, and it's a crucial program. In the last budget cycle, it was funded at $60.5 million, and that was the largest investment in that pool the program has ever seen. The base budget for that is $500,000. So you could see the major impact that investment will have on supply. Recently, Habitat Minnesota and local habitats around the state were directly and indirectly awarded $12.1 million for projects through this pool of funds. So it's helping Habitat increase its impact in communities, moving affiliates who are doing 1 home a year to maybe 4 or 5 homes a year, those types of things in communities. We have affiliates who have never done multi-unit developments who now in greater Minnesota are. We have one Habitat affiliate in Alexandria who's doing a 42-unit development, and it's the first time. So resources like this and having ongoing dedicated funding for these pools are critical to helping us project into the future and have an efficient use of resources across the state. So our ask this year is that the state would continue to fund this program. It is a critical pipeline for starter homes across the state. We're asking for the same investment in the FY 26 to 27 budget of $60.5 million, which would enable the production of over 500 entry-level owner-occupied homes throughout the state. The second key item that we're focused on is the Greater Minnesota Housing Infrastructure Grant Program. This program was funded at $8 million one time in the last budget cycle. And what Ann earlier was talking about the Yes to Homes and increasing density around the state. And when we started talking about that in the last legislative session, one key thing came from Greater Minnesota cities, which was this question about infrastructure. This pool of funds can help create more infrastructure in communities to help create more supply of modest density and homeownership in their communities. So, and we really believe this will be a very important program for Greater Minnesota cities and help Habitat too. So we continue to advocate for this pool of resources, covering up to 50% of the capital costs of public infrastructure necessary to support housing development projects. And finally, this is just a nice mission moment, the impact of homeownership. This is a quote. The woman represented in the photo is in Morrison County outside of Little Falls. And she just said, "This wasn't just about having a roof over our heads. It was about creating a foundation for our future. Owning an affordable home means more than just the security of a place to live. It means stability. My children are thriving in a stable environment. We now have the space to grow, both emotionally and financially. I can pursue career opportunities without the constant fear of being displaced and can invest in my community and my family's future." And we share this because it's nice to kind of see the impact of the resources you invested in a past budget year in real communities and families. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Ms. City. I have a couple questions for you. Your map that showed all of the places that you have affiliates, I think is really illustrative of the fact that this problem is all around Minnesota, and we really need partners like Habitat that are doing the work. Grateful for that work that you guys are doing. Can you talk a little bit about the instability of pricing at this point? We're talking about needing to create 100,000 new homes. We've been talking about it for years, but we really have reached a crisis point. Can you talk about potential instability in those prices? Again, we're happy to have you back when we talk about policy barriers, but are there market forces or federal forces that you're concerned about in that area?
Yes, Chair Port, thank you for the question. Most recently, instability concerns would be around lumber, drywall, other types of pricing that might be impacted by federal changes with our resources coming from other places like Canada and Mexico. We're also impacted by federal funding. Habitat affiliates across the state use all types of federal resources. In entitlement communities like the Twin Cities, Duluth, Rochester, some programs that you might be familiar with would be the Home or Community Development Block Grant Program. SHOP it's called Self-Help Homeownership. It's a program that really Habitat uses Regularly, it focuses on the sweat equity component and homebuyer education. All three of those programs are federally funded and will impact Habitat's program model. The major one for rural communities is the USDA 502 Direct Loan Program. This is a federally funded first mortgage product that is only available in rural communities. And should that program be eliminated, it would dramatically upset rural homeownership, not just through Habitat, through anyone who is offering low-income, moderate-income households accessible homeownership opportunities. And then just around pricing, you know, as we sort of project into the future, having, as I mentioned earlier, a stable source of funds to help plan out can help affiliates and all developers really purchase land all at once and create efficiencies in the process. So these are things we're all working on today.
Thank you, Mrs. Incity. Members, do you have other questions for Ms. Incity? All right, thank you so much for your presentation. Next on our list, we have Kelly Law from Minnesota Consortium of Community Developers. Welcome to the committee, Ms. Law. Please introduce yourself for the record and begin when you're ready.
Chair Port, Vice Chair Bolden, members of the committee, my name is Kelly Law, and I'm a Senior Policy and Field Building Advisor with the Minnesota Consortium of Community Developers. So MCCD is an association of nonprofit community development organizations and community development financial institutions committed to expanding the wealth and resources of neighborhoods and communities through affordable housing and economic development initiatives. Our members have affordable housing projects across the state and serve Minnesotans at the greatest levels of need. Our multifamily providers provide housing that is affordable to families and individuals at or below 80% of area median income, and with most of our members providing deeply affordable housing to residents at or below 30% AMI or to those transitioning out of homelessness. This housing is typically paired with site-based supportive services, which can include mental health services, chemical dependency recovery, educational and employment services, childcare, case management, and more. Without these critical services, we know that individuals and households with a history of homelessness and housing instability have a higher likelihood of re-entering homelessness or losing their housing. Our home ownership members build and preserve affordable homes for new home buyers, especially first-generation home buyers. They also provide a variety of homebuyer services, included but not limited to down payment assistance, homeownership education, training and counseling, mortgage readiness and credit repair, home improvement financing and construction management services, and foreclosure prevention counseling. To date, MCCD members have created or preserved over 30,000 units of affordable housing, both rental and homeownership, providing thousands of Minnesota households with stable and affordable housing. Of the rental or homeowner households supported by our members, more than 74% identify as Black, Indigenous, or people of color who have been historically excluded from the private market and traditional pathways to stable housing. Our members are mission-driven on the ground in our communities, ensuring that Minnesotans have a quality, safe home that they can afford. Some of the existing and emerging concerns that our members and their residents face are rising insurance rates. We are hearing from both homeowners and multifamily providers that increasing in property insurance rates are creating a significant barrier to housing affordability. I'll touch on this a little bit more later in the presentation. We are also noticing concerns around closure or sale of affordable units. We're at risk of losing an estimated 2,500 units of housing over the next 2 years. This is data from 2024, so this number could be even higher now. We know that when affordable housing properties are sold, they are typically returned to market rate, torn down, or redeveloped, meaning that the households currently stably housed are displaced. We are also seeing continuing concerns around operating support for affordable housing projects, costs of insurance, increased costs of regular rate maintenance, utility expenses, supportive services, and staffing shortages have further decimated already razor-thin operating budgets. Kristen and and both spoke to this, but lack of available inventory. We have a distinct lack of affordable homes for home buyers to purchase. And if they can find a home, the cost to purchase or develop have increased significantly over the past 10 years. And then finally, growing rental arrears from residents. While the eviction moratorium was critical to keeping residents stably in their homes during the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, residents continue to struggle to pay their rent. In 2019, a nonprofit affordable housing provider could expect to collect about 86% of rents per month, and that number is now closer to about 78%. These concerns are due in part to the fact that we are simply not building enough housing. I know you've heard that a few times today. It's estimated that Minnesota has a housing shortage of approximately, I think I heard 114, my number was 106, but I'll go with 114,000 units, ranking among the top 10 states with the most severe housing shortages. Right now, we need more than 2,500 new units targeted at 30% AMI and under, and more than 2,000 new units targeted at 30 to 50% AMI, and we're only building a fraction of that. What can be done this session? I'm sure all of you have heard this from me before, but housing infrastructure bonds. We know that housing infrastructure bonds are an extremely flexible tool and source of capital to build and preserve affordable housing. Since 2012, we have built more than 7,000 affordable homes, both homeownership and rental. We know that only 1 in 5 projects that apply to Minnesota Housing for resources are able to move forward and be funded. And this means that we are leaving affordable housing projects in the pipeline when we are at a time when we're experiencing a statewide housing shortage. We are also working on the Economic Development and Housing Challenge Program. This tool can be used in Greater Minnesota and the metro area statewide, and it's one of MHFA's most versatile funding sources to create housing that supports economic development and local workforces. Since 2020 alone, funding from the Challenge Program has built more than 1,300 new homes and 800 units of affordable rental housing. And finally, the last piece that we will be working on this session is a task force on homeowners and commercial property insurance. We know that rising insurance rates and changes in coverage are deeply impacting our members and the communities they serve. This is happening across the housing continuum, not just in the affordable space. So we believe that we need a state task force composed of key stakeholders to prevent disruptions or loss to housing development and preservation, and to support the long-term sustainability of Minnesota's housing infrastructure. Our multifamily members are spending thousands of dollars working with insurance brokers to find insurance providers for their properties, sometimes contacting 60+ providers to get a single quote. Recently, one of our members reported a single-year increase of $600,000 on their insurance cost for just one property. For homeowners, insurance rates are also increasing. We're hearing that for some homeowners, rates are increasing as much as $300 per month, which makes their once stable housing costs no longer affordable. So with that, thank you so much for the opportunity to testify today. We look forward to working together this session to address our state's housing crisis.
Thank you, Ms. Law. Members, do you have questions? Senator Lucero.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Not a question for the testifier, so it was going to be a comment in between testifiers while the next one's walking up. If you
Sure. I will just add, I appreciate you bringing up the insurance question. It's something we're hearing a lot about all across the spectrum, and look forward to your proposal and also just continuing that conversation. I think it's a critical part of keeping housing affordable. So thank you for your presentation. As the next partner or the next presenter comes up, Tori Clark West. And then Senator Lucero.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to Ms. Law and others. Ms. Law had just cited the 106 or 114,000 unit shortage. And as I continue to brainstorm, I guess, and have conversations on what can we do, I'm almost thinking, I'm envisioning 2 buckets. There's a bucket of, there are policies and or restrictions and or mandates, or however you want to frame it, that government is imposing that result in higher costs due to maybe a shortage of supply, increase in demand, et cetera. So there's policy type things, whether they be statute or ordinance. And then the other bucket is direct costs, not mandates or policy that results in increased costs, but directly charge costs from the state, such as the sales tax, just as an example, such as the building permit fees, and all of these costs get forwarded or pushed forward. So as other things that are not in direct influence under state government, such as the insurance piece, as those are increasing in cost, what can we look at in these two buckets as we continue the conversations to expeditiously reduce the cost that state government is directly charging? So I'm just thinking of that as we listen to these testifiers, and as we listen to the survey of the state of housing, 114, 106, whatever it is, and if we're dealing with 40, that's awesome that we're putting forward 40 unit developments, 100 unit developments, but that's not going to overcome the shortage that we're having. So what can we do to incentivize quickly? And we obviously, as state lawmakers, have multiple decisions, but anyway, I just throw that forward as we continue to chew on this, these two buckets, policy and then direct costs that we as the state are imposing. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Lucero. Welcome to the committee, Ms. Clark-West. Please introduce yourself and your organization and begin with your presentation.
Good afternoon, Chair Port and members of the committee. My name is Victoria or Tori Clark-West, and I'm the Executive Director of North Country Cooperative Foundation, or NCF. Thank you for the opportunity to share insights on the state of manufactured housing in Minnesota and the role that our organization plays in preserving this critical source of attainable homeownership. NCF is a nonprofit organization based in St. Paul, dedicated to expanding cooperative ownership and economic opportunity. Since the early 2000s, we have focused on helping residents of manufactured home communities, commonly referred to as mobile home parks, purchase the land beneath their homes and convert their communities into resident-owned co-ops. In addition to co-op development, we provide ongoing advising and coaching to ensure these communities thrive, helping members of these co-ops with governance, management, and financial sustainability. In 2023, we created a loan fund to provide a mission-driven lending solution to our partner cooperatives, and recently launched a manufactured home dealership to ensure our co-ops have access to high-quality, factory-built homes. Manufactured housing is Minnesota's largest source of naturally occurring affordable homeownership, serving over 180,000 residents. For many, it is the only pathway to owning a home. While there are misconceptions about manufactured home communities, the reality is that most residents, about 87% of folks living in these communities, own their homes. The only thing these residents rent is the land underneath their home. New manufactured homes are cost-effective, energy-efficient, and durable, while costing about half as much to construct than site-built homes. Preserving these communities is also highly cost-effective, with infrastructure rehab averaging $10,000 to $50,000 a unit, far less than other affordable housing solutions. Manufactured housing is found all across the state and serves a diverse population who would otherwise struggle to find attainable homeownership opportunities. 75% of residents in our partner cooperatives earn less than 60% of the area median income, and about 40% are households of color. Historically, manufactured home communities were locally owned and operated. Many were developed by small business owners or local farmers who lived on site or nearby and were invested in the well-being of their residents and the property. Over time, out-of-state investors have identified an opportunity to profit from these communities. Investors have found they can raise land rent without substantially reinvesting in infrastructure. Since homeowners rent the land under their homes and the cost to move a home is prohibitively expensive, homeowners have little choice but to pay increasing land rent, even when roads, water, and sewer systems are persistently neglected. In investor-owned communities, lot rents typically rise by 5 to 6% per year. In contrast, resident-owned cooperatives see stable increases of about a 2% per year on average increase. In a resident-owned community, homeowners collectively own the land through the co-op. Their land rent goes towards running the community, paying the mortgage, and making needed improvements. Most importantly, resident ownership means stability. There's no risk of sudden sale or displacement, ensuring these communities remain a permanent source of affordable homeownership. Since 2004, our organization has helped 16 communities, 13 in Minnesota, transition to co-op ownership. Through this work, we've gained a deep understanding of what it takes to permanently preserve these communities and the many challenges we face. With the legislature's support, we've made significant progress in building a strong set of tools to protect these communities for the long term. Many manufactured home communities rely on aging, privately owned infrastructure, water, sewer, roads, and electrical systems, most of which were built in the 1950s and 60s. Without investment, these failing systems put entire communities at risk. Recognizing the urgency of the situation, the legislature established the Manufactured Home Community Redevelopment Program, yes, another acronym, MHCR. Since 2020, the program has awarded approximately $44 million in grants, with nearly $20 million supporting co-op resident-owned communities. The next slide highlights a project funded through MHCR to demonstrate the critical impact of this program, but for time, I will let you read that on your own. Minnesota cannot afford to scale back investments in manufactured home community infrastructure. There is too much at risk, and demand continues to grow. Thankfully, Minnesota has many existing programs that can be leveraged to expand access for future infrastructure improvements. Another challenge facing manufactured housing is the rising cost of homes and the lack of affordable financing. In the last 10 years, the cost to build a new manufactured home has more than doubled, yet financing options remain limited. Because manufactured homes, when they're placed on leased land, are titled as personal property, they don't qualify for traditional 30-year mortgages or most down payment assistance programs. Instead, buyers are left with personal property loans that are honestly more akin to auto loan financing than you would think of a traditional mortgage. Recognizing this gap, the state legislature took an important step in 2023 by appropriating $10 million to develop innovative manufactured home loan tools to bring homeownership within reach. I am delighted to share that in partnership with NeighborWorks Home Partners, another St. Paul-based nonprofit loan fund, Minnesota is on track to leverage the $10 million direct appropriation to launch a brand new manufactured home financing program. NeighborWorks Home Partners is in the final stages of negotiating its contract with Minnesota Housing, and we anticipate the program to be rolled out in April. I cannot tell you how excited I am for this to be rolled out. Modeled after successful programs across the country, this loan product will feature a 30-year term and a competitive interest rate, bringing manufactured home financing in line with traditional mortgages in this state for the first time. It will also be paired with a brand new homebuyer education course developed in partnership with the Minnesota Homeownership Center, and that course is live if you visit their website, and it's fantastic. This program and this education program is a game changer for manufactured homeowners in Minnesota and will bring homeownership within reach for hundreds of families. The legislature could help expand the success of this program by allocating additional resources for down payment assistance and expanding existing programs. The final issue I want to highlight today is one that you've heard me testify before this committee before, and it is the rapid shift in the ownership landscape of manufactured home communities. Since 2015, out-of-state investors have acquired nearly 25% of the state's manufactured housing stock, purchasing 131 communities and about 12,000 homes. A significant portion of these acquisitions have been made by private equity firms, which have a track record of driving up land rents, often by double-digit percentages, and deferring critical infrastructure improvements. To make matters worse, federally backed entities are fueling these acquisitions. In Minnesota, about 2/3 of the private equity purchases have been financed by Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac. Seeing the urgency, the legislature took an important step in 2023 by appropriating $10 million to our organization to establish a revolving loan fund for cooperative purchases. We received the first tranche of the appropriation in August 2024 and have deployed $1.15 million in loans to co-ops in Breckenridge and Alexandria, Minnesota. These loans were provided at substantially below market rates to complement first mortgage loans from Minnesota Housing. This financing partnership helped the state appropriation go farther and serve more households. This past fall, we were notified that for the foreseeable future, Minnesota Housing would not be in a position to lend on manufactured home community acquisitions due to liquidity and staffing constraints. We are now working to identify alternative financing, including expanding our loan fund to fill the gap. Fast-acting capital remains the most critical tool we have to scale preservation of these communities and prevent displacement. The legislature also passed a notice of sale law in 2023, requiring community owners to notify Minnesota Housing and the community's residents when they are considering a sale. A 5% tax credit was also passed for community owners who sell to co-ops, nonprofits, and municipal entities. The intent of these laws was to give preservation-minded buyers a chance to compete when communities are for sale and to provide an incentive for owners to sell to not-for-profit entities. Since the law went into effect in July 2023, Minnesota Housing has received 8 notices, yet 31 sales have closed between July and the end of 2024. In most cases, notices arrive too late after the property is already under contract. This past fall, we were able to reach one owner before the property went under contract, and happily, we are on track to convert that community to a cooperative in just the next few months. It is clear that additional awareness and potential enforcement are necessary to ensure these laws achieve their intended results. Thank you to this committee and for the continued leadership on the issues facing manufactured home community residents. We look forward to working with you this legislative session.
Thank you, Ms. Clark-West. I have a question about the infrastructure work that you all do. You showed a map with the parks or the communities that you've been able to do that work in with the program thus far. Can you give me an idea of, with our aging stock, how, is that 2%? Is that 20% of communities that are going to need infrastructure? Can you just give us an idea of sort of what the scope of the need is likely to be over the next few years?
I believe it'd be hard for me to quantify that, but I can quantify the amount of demand that Minnesota Housing has had for the MHCR program. I believe in 2023, there was 56 million in applications, and I did write down, anticipating this question, that the program received, I think, 13 million in requests this year, of which there was 18 applications, 13.3 million in requests, of $2.7 million available. So I have yet to go through a community that hasn't needed some level of infrastructure rehabilitation.
Thank you, that's helpful. Senator Draheim.
Thank you, Chairport, and thank you once again for the testimony. I had one comment and then one question. The comment about the infrastructure. I think one of the reasons I've been a big supporter of that program is the knowledge that most parks are really old. Most parks were built in the 70s, if not earlier, and there's going to be a need everywhere. I would say at least 80% of the parks are probably going to need some infrastructure. So I'm glad we have the program, and I'm glad it's being used. So, but my question, Chair, has to do with the notice. So it was a year ago, it was a lot of bills ago. Can someone give me a brief understanding about how that notice is supposed to work and maybe any ideas on why it isn't working?
Ms. Clark, do you want to take a stab at that, or we can see if council has?
I don't have the bill language directly in front of me, so I would.
So if we could
Defer to
put
staff.
council on notice at the last second again.
Why don't we give Ms. Painter a few minutes to look at that, and we can move on and come back to her if she can find an answer to us. I think
Thank you.
that bill went through the Commerce Department, but I similarly have the same question, why isn't it working? So thank you very much for your presentation. We appreciate your time in our committee.
Thank you very much.
Let's see, next we have Eric Haig from Homeline. Welcome to the committee. If you would just introduce yourself for the record when you're ready and begin with your presentation.
Thank you, Chair Port and members of the committee. My name is Eric Hauge. I'm the Executive Director of Homeline. You may be familiar with our Public Policy Director, Michael Dahl. I have a little bit more hair than he does, but you probably recognize him more. Thanks for the opportunity to testify. Homeline's a statewide tenant advocacy organization that provides legal advice, education, and organizing services to renters across the state. We operate a free and confidential legal hotline that's available to any renter to answer questions about their tenant rights. We also have a project that involves sending a multilingual eviction letter to every eviction defendant in the state, every residential eviction defendant in the state. And we have public education efforts, educating last year over 11,000 members of the community, landlords, tenants, attorneys, service providers, government staff, et cetera. And renters are seeking to enforce their rights in record numbers. Our hotline has seen a 50% increase in client volume compared to pre-pandemic levels. And in just the last 2 years, our hotline averaged over 20,000 renter households advised per year, the most in our 32-plus year history. I think in your packet you have a summary of our statistics from last year. This is not just a metro issue. Over 20% of our clients are outside the 7-county metro. And in recent years, we've seen a significant increase in service to individuals who speak Hmong, Somali, and Spanish as their primary language. Other testifiers have already spoken eloquently about the dire lack of deeply affordable rental housing in our state. And the housing affordability issue is so fundamental, it influences and exacerbates almost every rental housing topic that we advise on. Homeline has a unique insight into the issues facing renters, so I'm going to focus my time on the side effects of this unaffordable and, for some, inaccessible rental market. Close to 30% of Minnesota's households live in rental housing. That's approximately 650,000 households that rely on the rules and regulations that you and your colleagues have adopted in Chapter 504B, the statutes that govern almost every aspect and operation of the homes of renters in our state, working to balance the power dynamic and regulate leases that control these relationships. Most landlords and tenants get along, and most disputes don't require court. We frequently work with tenants to negotiate disputes and solve common issues such as repairs and withheld deposits without legal action. The reason we have laws and state laws and local regulations is to create a level playing field and address the small percentage of harmful practices. This is generally because landlords write the leases, and until recently, updates to these laws have been very infrequent. And it's important to recognize just how fundamental these safeguards are. They regulate a wide spectrum of issues that arise in tenant-landlord relationships because of the values that our society places on home. Home is where we expect to be safe, secure, and able to freely go about the rest of our lives without experiencing disruption and disrepair. Home is a safe haven, a refuge, and a foundation for our lives. Instability in our home translates to struggles at work, at school, and throughout our communities. This is why it's critically important that renters have both the law to balance this relationship and the tools to enforce their rights when their home is threatened. Landlord-tenant laws need to evolve and look for an always shifting societally acceptable balance between the rights of landlords and tenants. As you've heard from the other testifiers, these laws have housing and these laws have a disproportionate impact on people of color, immigrants, and renters with limited English proficiency, who comprise a higher percentage of the rental population than owner-occupied housing. Thankfully, there have been real improvements in tenants' lives and housing situations, in large part due to legislative action over the last biennium to address the power imbalance. But more can and should be done because regulating the quality and stability of homes requires responsiveness to those who reside there. The issues that tenants contact us about are fairly consistent year to year and throughout the state. You can follow along in your handout. The top 10 issues we advised about last year are on the right side. I'm going to share a little bit about these topics and what the legislature has recently done to respond to some of them, and point out a few areas where we're still behind as a state. On the back of the handout is a URL and a QR code for the Minnesota Tenant Bill of Rights, if you wish to get details on both what the legislature has accomplished in the last biennium, as well as where there are still gaps. First on the list is repairs. Repairs have almost always been the top issue that we hear about from renters. And Minnesota has taken positive steps towards improving this. The legislature accomplished a statewide minimum heat code, as well as modernization, expansion, and the strengthening of emergency repair and illegal lockout statutes. But the legislature could still do more here. The right to a habitable home through repair and deduct policies, and the right to balanced power in court by modernizing the consequences and penalties of existing habitability protections, so they actually act as a deterrent. Next on the list is evictions. As I mentioned, Homeland has a project where we send a multilingual letter to every eviction defendant in the state. Historically, non-payment of rent has been the most common reason. About 95% of evictions are usually filed for that. However, following the pandemic, Minnesota saw drastic increases in eviction filings, peaking in 2023 with over 25,000 cases. A normal non-pandemic year was around 13 to 15,000 cases filed. Last year, likely due to action the legislature took, there was a 10% dip in statewide filings, and the percent of cases that were filed for non-payment of rent were reduced as well. This is a small glimmer of good news that Minnesota can and should improve on. So that's what the legislature accomplished, is a 14-day pre-eviction written notice before evictions for non-payment, as well as modernization of eviction rules and court processes, making expungement more accessible, and other court processes. There's many more items that could be improved here. For example, one very accessible fix is prohibiting the listing of minors in eviction filing cases. Next on the list is security deposits. The cost and timing of deposits can be a serious barrier for tenants getting into housing. And unfortunately, it's the business practice of some landlords to simply withhold and force tenants to enforce their rights. But in the last biennium, the legislature did accomplish inspection protections. Tenants now have a right to request both a move-in and a move-out inspection, minimizing disputes about security deposit damages. But effectively, the security deposit statute in Minnesota hasn't been updated significantly since it was created in the 1970s. The interest rate could be increased, deposits could be capped, more detail could be included in the withholding notice. There's many more items on our top 10 list, including break lease, landlord notice to vacate, lease questions, privacy intrusion, financial aid fees, et cetera. I'll just note that, again, you can scan this and take a look at some of the policies that the legislature has accomplished in the last biennium, which we are seeing a significant improvement in outcomes for our clients on many of these topics. I mentioned about evictions. We saw a decrease in evictions, and we've been able to engage with more renters prior to the eviction process so that they can address that before it ends up in court. Lastly, I'll just say that one of the other items that isn't on our top 10 list, but is a fundamental part of the housing continuum that's been talked about today already, is access, fair access to housing. So one of the things that the legislature did in the last biennium was ensure that tenant screening reports are using updated information, prohibiting denials based on pending evictions, and allowing ITINs for rental applications. However, there's more things that could be done to improve the access to housing. Most notably would be source of income discrimination protections. I want to thank you again for the opportunity to testify about issues impacting Minnesota renters. We're enthused that this committee is interested in supporting the housing affordability, stability, and safety and rights of Minnesota renters. So please know that Homeline is happy to provide feedback and suggestions about proposals based on the experiences of our clients. And I'm happy to be available for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hauge. We'll start with Senator Bolden.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the presentation and for the work that you all are doing. You alluded to this, but I just want to clarify and ask directly. I appreciate the top 10 reasons for calls. Have you noticed themes or changes in those over time, or does this, these really don't change? This is sort of what you are consistently hearing?
Mr. Hauge?
Senator Port and Vice Chair Bolden, thank you for the question. Our list has been fairly consistent since we started over 32 years ago. I will say that during the pandemic, for the couple of years post-pandemic, evictions were on the top of our list. I think 2024 might have been the first year post-pandemic that repairs were back on top. So, and as I mentioned earlier, we did hit a peak in 2023. We had over 25,000 evictions filed in the state. So that has been one thing that's changed dramatically. I'll also note that one thing that I didn't talk about was fees. The legislature did partially tackle the issue of fees in the last biennium. And we have seen fees is still on the top, in our top 10 list. I think it was higher up in previous years. It's dropped a little bit. But there were some accomplishments that the legislature did in the last biennium: fee disclosure, service support animal fee prohibition disclosure. But there's a ton of fees. That's kind of the new world for our clients, is that there are just fees being invented for the purpose of collecting money. And in reality, when a renter is going, or prospective renter is going to find a rental home, they want to know what the monthly cost is going to be. And that's what we're trying to get to. We see all sorts of additional fees like pre-lease deposits, application screening fees, late fees that could be regulated more.
Senator Clark?
Thank you, Chair Port. You mentioned minors on eviction actions as one of your top priorities. Are we talking like 17-year-olds, or what are we talking? How young are these kids?
Mr. Hauge?
Yes, I believe we're talking about landlords sometimes putting minors under 18, listing them on eviction filings. And so that could have a longer-term impact on their housing in the future.
Follow-ups, Senator Clark?
Chair Port, I imagine this then gets put on their credit report and then perhaps affects, well, what they can apply for loans later on in life.
It can, yes. The mark of an eviction on one's record can have far-reaching consequences within rental housing and home ownership and other consequences.
I have one final question for you. On the sort of demographics that you have on the tenant hotline information, and this isn't something you'd need to get for us today, but if you have any breakdowns on age, that would be helpful information for us as well. I know we have members on the committee who are particularly interested in senior housing, and we've had certainly some specific areas where senior housing has had particular troubles that we are planning to take a look at this year. So any information you have on that would be helpful.
Thank you, Chair Port. Unfortunately, we do not collect age. Our intake process is meant to be very minimal to try to help people as soon as possible. I will note, though, one of the issues that we care a lot about and our clients care a lot about, and that the legislature took serious action on in the last year, is the renter's credit. And senior renters are really benefit from that program. And there's a move this tax filing season so that renters will be applying for their renter's credit through the income tax filing process rather than a separate process. So we're hopeful that that's going to expand that incredibly important program for particularly senior renters.
Thank you. All right, thank you so much for your presentation. We'll move on to our last presentation before we have the agency join us. Shauna Temenis from the Housing Justice Center. Nice to have you back in our committee, Ms. Temenis. Please introduce yourself and your organization and begin with your presentation.
Thank you, Chair Port. My name is Shana Temenis. I'm a housing justice litigator at the Housing Justice Center. HJC is a nonprofit public interest advocacy organization and legal nonprofit whose primary mission is preserve and expand affordable housing statewide. Using legal advocacy, impact litigation, research, and community education, the Housing Justice Center works to encourage the production of affordable housing, the preservation of affordable housing, and the protection and rights of people who need affordable places to call home. So HJC works statewide. For example, we're working in manufactured home community in Marshall facing a potential park closure. We organize renters with repair issues in Duluth trying to understand their legal rights. And we are currently investigating civil rights issues for a second-ring suburb who are facing some NIMBY opposition and some civil rights complaints. In every part of our state, it's unique. And in every part of our state, we have renters and manufactured homeowners whose right to safe, stable, affordable, and dignified places to call home is out of reach. Today, I want to talk to you about 3 things that are the most pressing things Minnesotans face regarding their homes: affordability, threat of displacement, and the inability of Minnesotans to enforce their legal rights. At a fundamental level, many Minnesotans can't afford their homes. The biggest mismatch is for low-income renters who are priced out of entire neighborhoods and sometimes even entire towns. The loss of deep affordability is felt across the state. Both subsidized programs such as rural development or RD and unsubsidized programs known as NOAA properties, naturally occurring affordable housing, we are losing those properties faster than we are building. The eradication of affordable housing is not limited to rental properties. We know in manufactured home communities across the state, they are being sold to corporate out-of-town landlords who are investment groups. And when they come in, they have an increased cost of housing that makes the most affordable form of home ownership, manufactured housing, out of reach for our communities. Minnesotans also cannot find housing that is affordable, and when that happens, they're at significant increased risk of being displaced. A recent study by the Harvard Joint Center for Housing Studies found that 49% of Minnesotans spend more than a third of their income on rent, and 26% of Minnesotans spend over half of their monthly take-home on rent. You know, that's one car payment, one missed shift because of a sick kid, or a hospital bill between making rent on the first and getting an eviction filed against you. And because of that, it's no wonder that 618 evictions, when I checked yesterday, have been filed in Hennepin County in 2025. And that's not just a metro problem. We see consistently that the top 5 eviction rates in the state of Minnesota include counties such as Clay County and Roseau County. Formal evictions are only one of the more visible ways that we track displacement in Minnesota. We also know that many renters are forced to leave their homes due to deteriorating living conditions, non-renewal of leases, or landlords who create hostile environments that make living in the place unbearable. These hidden forms of displacement disproportionately impact low-income families, seniors, and communities of color, leaving them with few options and forcing them to housing instability or even homelessness. I lastly want to talk to you about the inability of Minnesotans to enforce their legal rights. Without strong protections and accountability for landlords, thousands of Minnesotans will continue to face the impossible choice between enduring unsafe housing or uprooting their lives. Our housing laws are both confusing and virtually meaningless for families if they cannot access help to assert those rights. Even when not facing the stress caused by housing instability, our patchwork maze of housing regulation is daunting. I practice in manufactured home law, so I'll use this as an example. My primary area of practice, you can see that the sales are regulated by the Department of Commerce, but manufactured home parks are licensed by the Department of Health. The Department of Labor and Industry sets the construction standards for the homes. And if that's not confusing enough, Minnesota Housing runs the manufactured home funding programs and the Relocation Trust Fund, and the AG can enforce certain consumer rights. I mean, this is great. This sounds like a lot of government agencies that can really help. But let me tell you, as a practical matter, it really seems that because it's everybody's problem, it's nobody's problem. And I'm just on the phone being pushed from agency to agency, and everyone's saying it's not their job. In court, the power imbalance in the system often has landlords with attorneys and renters asserting their rights pro se. But when renters and manufactured homeowners are represented, we see meaningful change. Last year alone, our work at the Housing Justice Center resulted in $2 million in monetary damages and debt discharge for low-income Minnesotans. While I could spend all day telling you about the things I've learned at barbecues and in court across the state of Minnesota, I want to tell you about one community that I had the honor of serving in Sartell this year. So after this couple that I'd been working with had lived in their manufactured home for decades, owned it outright, but rented the land that they lived in, they started organizing their community around some habitability issues in the aging park. They were targeted for an illegal eviction, and the first question in this really proud, very wonderful family I'd been working with was, what's the point? Should I even fight it? Like, my house is on the line. And that was a repeated question, was the stakes that were so high, how could I even do this? It's something that I remember sitting them after a full day in court and the judge ruled in our favor, and the first thing she said is, "I can't believe they believed me. I can't believe they believed me, and I don't think they would have if I didn't have an attorney." Since winning their eviction case, my clients have continued to advocate for the rights of all homeowners in their community and shared their story broadly to help embolden others to fight for their rights. The state of housing in Minnesota is this. Too many Minnesotans are living in fear of losing their homes, facing unjust evictions, or being priced out of their communities. We must commit to preserving and expanding affordable housing, strengthening tenant protections, and ensuring that every Minnesotan has the legal support they need to preserve their rights. No one should have to choose between asserting their legal rights and risking their home. I urge you to take meaningful action to address these challenges so that every Minnesotan, regardless of income or background, location, or place in life, has a safe, stable, and dignified place to call home. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jimenez. Members, questions? Senator Abler.
Maybe it's a rookie question, Madam Chair, and I'm sorry I was late. I was on hold with IRS for 45 minutes until they cut me off. So okay. So I felt like one of those tenants facing eviction. Anyway, so maybe it's a question just for the bigger picture, but all these presentations we've been listening to, are we benefited by having big developers take our money, or are we better if we had like little one-horse builders working in small clusters, medium and small developers? I'll just give you a quick thing. I know that we're running out of time, but in the city of Ramsey, they celebrated building a 47-unit thing when the list of people they were so proud of, there was a whole list of in this group and that group, and it was this is some years ago, but it was $222,000 a unit. Across Ramsey, they built, and it had like vinyl floor, off-gassing, the carpet was cheap, the cupboards were lousy, they had a community room smaller than this area, it was like tacky, $222,000. Across the way, actually a nice local builder had built some apartments, 2-bedroom with granite countertops for $157,000. I just, maybe it's rhetorical now, but are we feeding the wrong agents of this? The way we talk about what, I don't know, just that's my question, and maybe it's something to talk about, but maybe we're on the wrong track. Thanks.
Ms. Jimenez, do you have experience with, your clients and how they experience those two sorts of developers?
Yes, Chair Port, Senator Abler. So I'm sure the policy wonks would have a much more nuanced answer. Let me tell you as a licensed attorney what I see. Is when you have someone who is deeply embedded in this community and understands our regulations and what our expectations are, both as a community member and as someone who receives state funds, I have a different experience in court with them than a corporate LLC who's an out-of-town landlord. I will say that if housing was an easy fix, right, if there was only one problem, then I would come and say there's only one problem, fix it. We have people who are homeless. But I will say that the closer you are to a community, it makes sense that that's who you serve and that you have pride in doing so. And that's an important part of this puzzle, to make sure not only are we building the housing that people need, but once that housing is built and the cupboard falls off, that person is responsive and they're taking care of the people that are now living in that home.
Thank you, Ms. Jimenez. And I think we heard a similar feeling from North Country, when they were talking about ownership of manufactured home parks. If it's someone local, it's a very different response than if it's a huge corporate entity that might be from out of state. Senator Bolden, do you want to respond to that in regards to the bill you're carrying?
Yes, thank you, Chair Port, and I appreciate this conversation and appreciate the perspective you are bringing. I hear that as well in terms, and I appreciate this has come up a couple of times in testimony today, the idea of when corporations are, buying up properties, taking opportunities away from local folks in community, whether it's a manufactured home or whether it's apartments or whether it's single-family homes, the experience is far different for the folks who are living in those properties. And so I do hope to, Chair Port, we can have more conversation about the bill I have been carrying for the last several years to sort of get at that and look at, ways to protect local folks in community and deal with the issue of corporate ownership of properties, whether it be single-family homes or others.
Anything to add, Ms. Jimenez? Any final questions, Senator Lucero?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And these conversations are important. But it's very easy to get lost in the rhetoric. So when we speak about in-state or out-of-state, that's one thing. When we speak about corporate or non-corporate, that's another thing. When we speak about big corporate or small corporate, when we speak about LLC versus an individual, it's so easy to say corporate equals big and equals out-of-state. But that isn't the case in most of the scenarios. An LLC, or the type of entity, is formed for legal reasons, for business and or tax structures. Most of the individuals who are investing in real estate have formed an LLC or could be an S Corp and be very, very small. So I'm throwing that out there because when we throw all these terms out here really fast, it's very easy for audiences to blend these together and then somehow walk away with, as a result of the rhetoric, corporate equals bad, LLC equals bad. And there's a much larger conversation that needs to take place, minus the rhetoric, so we can actually have solutions. I agree, out of state is and can have a non-personal impact for sure. But let's separate that from LLC, because there are single person LLCs, or maybe two siblings or two friends that come together and form an LLC, and that does not in and of itself equal bad. And so we just have to steer clear of this rhetoric and trying to blend these different ideas together. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Lucero. I encourage you to have a conversation with Senator Bolden, who has thought very deeply about those things over the course of the last 2 years and met with many stakeholders on that. Ms. Jimenez, thank you very much for your presentation. Members, we are going to give the commissioner and her team a moment to come up to the table. And in that time, we are going to have Mr. Olafson walk us through sort of the budget overview that this committee is in charge of.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. Again, my name is Eric Olafson. I'm the fiscal analyst for this committee. I'm your resource if you'd like an appropriation bill drafted, if you have questions about a particular fiscal note, or if you'd like to dive into the housing budget spreadsheet. I won't go into great detail about the housing budget. The Minnesota Housing Finance Agency will eventually present a more in-depth look at each specific program. But for the overall budget framework for this committee, the committee's budget jurisdiction includes the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency, Housing Infrastructure Bonds, or HIBs, and their authorization. So this committee would have to cover any new debt service for newly authorized HIBs. And Chapter 127 of Session Law from last year created the Housing Support Account within the Special Revenue Fund that receives an ongoing transfer of $450,000 per fiscal year, beginning in fiscal year 25. However, Chapter 127 did not include language to appropriate funds out of that new account, but this falls within our budget jurisdiction. In your packets, you should have a detailed version of the housing spreadsheet that tracks the appropriations within the housing committee's jurisdiction. Column A includes the agencies and their specific appropriated programs. Column B shows the fund where the funds come from. Column C through E shows the 2024 November forecasts biennial amounts. And columns F through Q show the governor's recommendations and how they compare to the 2024 November forecasts. So moving just to page 2 to line 54 of the spreadsheet, that shows the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency's biennial totals. So for the current biennium, 24 to 25, the legislature appropriated $1.114 billion to the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency. The base for 26 and 27 and 28, 29 moving forward is $165.6 million. So of the current spending in 24, 25, $948 million of that was one-time spending. For the governor's recs, if you look through columns F through Q, there are no changes for the Housing Finance Agency. So it maintains the base level appropriations in 26-27 and 28-29. On line 57 of the spreadsheet, you see that transfer to the housing support account of the $450,000 per fiscal year, so $900,000 in the base biennial totals. The governor recommends canceling that transfer to that account for a savings of $450,000 this fiscal year and then $900,000 each biennium moving forward. On line 63, you can see the debt service from the general fund to finance HIBs. So in the current biennium, approximately $72.3 million is appropriated from the general fund to finance HIBs, $77.7 million in the 26-27 biennium, and $83.5 million in the 28-29 biennium. Lines 65 through 71 is just for informational purposes only, but it tracks the metro sales tax revenue that was enacted in the 2023 session. 25% of that revenue goes to the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency for the state rental assistance account, so for rental assistance. In the current biennium, $68.5 million is transferred to the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency, 88.6 in the 26-27, 88.6 million in the 26-27 biennium, and 95.1 approximately in the 28-29 biennium. On line 76, you can see the one change item. Again, that's the repeal of the transfer to the housing support account with the corresponding savings. And with that, that concludes my walkthrough of the budget, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Olofsson. Do folks have general questions about this, with the reminder that the agency will be presenting the budget in more detail? Okay. Commissioner, welcome back to the committee. Nice to have you. If you want to just reintroduce yourself for us and for our new member, and then you can begin your presentation.
Chair Port and members of the committee, my name is Jennifer Ho, and I'm the Commissioner at Minnesota Housing, coming into my 7th session here. Sitting next to me is Dan Kitzberger, my Legislative Director. Also have some folks from Minnesota Housing over in the aisle. Senator Port, as initially planned? Okay. Well, first of all, I want to thank everybody who presented prior to me for doing such a good job of helping lay the land on housing in Minnesota. Gratitude to you back there who I can't see. Just a reminder, at Minnesota Housing, we believe that housing is foundational to a full life and a thriving state. So we equitably collaborate with individuals, communities, and partners to create, preserve, and finance housing that's affordable. In sum of what everybody else said, rental housing, we're just not building enough homes. Evictions are high, rents are outpacing incomes, and affordable rental providers face increased operating costs with constrained income. On the single-family side, the disparities between white and households of color remains egregious and persistent. It is harder and harder to become a first-time homebuyer, and supply remains low, especially for homes under $300,000. And we do not anticipate any significant new federal funding for housing development or preservation. I mean, this slide just highlights what it is that others have spoken to. The less you make, the harder it is. And I think, you know, one of the data points that we were really struck by is for the bottom quarter of income earners in Minnesota, from 2019 to 2022, that change in income was negative for that bottom quarter, while changes in rent obviously have been higher. So if you're poor, it's getting harder.
Commissioner, can I ask a question on the slide one back?
The mini bars?
No, one more.
Okay.
There we go. The single-family home ownership, you mentioned that the gap is getting bigger, and we heard this from other presenters as well, that the gap between white families and families of color is growing from what it was years ago. Do you have concerns that the new federal executive order that calls for the elimination of all DEI programs could have an effect on programs that specifically target this gap that we are trying to close?
And let me start by saying I'm not certain that all the dust has cleared in terms of understanding exactly what might or might not happen, but we have seen, as cabinet secretaries are being seated, letters going out to grantees that really are specific about things that are being targeted, both to stop doing as well as to promote. We don't have a sitting HUD secretary at this point in time, and we haven't seen anything from the new Treasury Secretary, which are the two agencies that we conduct the most business with. Am I concerned? Yeah, I'm concerned. I mean, I think that someone very eloquently talked about the fact, and maybe it was at the thing this morning too, lots of speeches today. But, you know, the creation of wealth disparity and home ownership disparity was an intentional act that government participated in for many, many decades. And so it seems to me that the intentional remediation of the impact of that, it seems to me a rightful role of government. You know, how that plays out in the conversations that we have with HUD and the Treasury over the course of the next 4 years is very unclear to me.
Thank you.
All right, now I've lost my place. Okay. As Mr. Olafson said, we do enter the 2026-2027 budget with a larger base than we have started any other legislative session that I'm aware of, in large part because of the increase to the base for the Bring It Home rental assistance in Greater Minnesota. And so when we think about our budget, we think about it in these four areas: preserve and create new homes, increase housing stability, support and strengthen home ownership, and build and support organizational capacity. So the governor's budget proposal reflects a maintenance of this increased base to funding of $165.6 million. And I think this slide is simply meant to show what a big difference 2023 was to any other time that we've been in these conversations. You know, historic, unprecedented, you know, however it is that we want to refer to it. It's also resulted in a pretty big shift in terms of where are the areas of emphasis for our investment. So if you see the pie on the left, our base was 50% capital resources and 25% housing stability resources. Now our base is 33% capital resources and 64% housing stability resources. And this doesn't include aid, which isn't in our appropriated budget, so the statewide and the local affordable housing aid. And it doesn't include the Bring It Home sales tax revenue. Again, we do work with our partners across the state on the whole continuum of housing. Everything from homelessness prevention and supportive housing, rental housing, manufactured housing, and home ownership. And I'm going to keep us moving because I know there's probably going to be a lot of questions today, but if I need to tap the brakes, just let me know. Okay. I really wanted to just make the point with this slide that the work is statewide, and you know, we do very closely track the Greater Minnesota versus Metro allocations of funds, and so that's really what I wanted to highlight here. So let's dig into the base budget. This is the less wonky spreadsheet version of what you just went through. This is the kind of color version. These are the agency's core programs, and you can see by category, by line item, the amount that we begin with in each of these. And I'm just going to quickly walk through each of these programs and what it does. So under preserve and create new homes, we have an array of different base programs. Something that I think is really important to realize, that state appropriations allow us to leverage federal sources. And they also allow us to do grants and 0% deferred loans in ways that other resources don't work that same way. which is what allows us to create and preserve housing that's affordable to Minnesotans who make the least. Not every state housing finance agency enjoys a relationship with their state legislature or assembly. They don't all get these types of resources. It allows us to go deeper in terms of who we help and how we help them. And the vast majority of our funds are distributed through our annual consolidated RFP. The Economic Development and Housing Challenge Program is, I think, one of our most responsive programs to local need because it allows us to partner with for-profit and nonprofit developers and local units of government. We do no interest, deferred loans. It has flexibility in that the community can tell us what it needs. It can do both rental and home ownership. And then in all these slides, I'm not going to read numbers at you, but the green box on the bottom is to give you a sense of the scale of what it is that we're doing. And here's a great photograph. I can't tell Kristen if you're still back there, but this is a grand opening at a Habitat for Humanity in St. Charles. It's always fun to be out there with big scissors. But this was purchased by an adult couple that's caring for an aging father, and it really is going to promote long-term affordability. Challenge helped make this home happen.
Commissioner, can I just interrupt for a moment? I see at the bottom that it splits these up by rental and home ownership. I think that has Senator Draheim's name on it. And just wondering also, as you go through these, and this might not be data you have today, and maybe something you could get back to us, but if you know, like, as you go through these programs, how many of them were oversubscribed? How many of them had, and by how far? Just for us to sort of get, you know, we put a huge investment in, but we all know it wasn't enough, and it'd be great to get sort of some eyes on by how much that was true in this last year.
The simple answer, Chairport, is all of them are subscribed by a lot, except for where we're coming back for a technical correction on the sprinklers program. I am hard-pressed. Maybe there might be times when one line item might be, but over the course of the biennium, oversubscribed. Maybe I'll let you know if I find a program that is not oversubscribed, and then we'll come back with by how much.
Senator Draheim.
You know, I think would be helpful for the committee is if we had a list of what we budgeted or what we funded, and then what was prescribed or asked for, so we can kind of see,
Just do a table.
you know, side by side. If we could get that in the coming weeks, would be great. Thanks.
Yeah, we can do that. We'll have to think about how we do it for the biennium. So we can take the 2023 and then the 2023 selections compared to what was requested in the 2024 selections and how that totals out.
Thank you.
Happily. The Workforce Homeownership Program can be used for a variety of things related to homeownership. We funded 36 proposals to create 439 units. Here I have actually a data point that 30% of the total requests could be funded there, and about 50% of the new construction requests were funded there. The Greater Minnesota Workforce Housing Program, again, a map because this targets Greater Minnesota communities, so wanted you to see how that is. And these are deferred loans for projects in small to mid-sized communities in order to create market rate workforce housing. Since 2017, more than $50 million in resources to build more than 1,500 units. So we had received 48 applications and 27 projects were funded. So I can tell we're giving you this information, but unevenly. We'll put it all in one place for you. As has gotten a lot of mention, manufactured home community infrastructure grants. These are just desperately needed in the communities where they are. The photograph here is a repaving of the streets in Richfield at Woodlawn Terrace, which is also a manufactured home community that converted to a cooperative. And so now the residents are working with us to get funding to improve the community that they own and live in. And also, I think just really the level of infrastructure repair that's needed is very profound when you start talking about brown water and sewage. And we did include requests versus proposals selected on the bottom of this slide. The rental rehab loans, this is to make improvements in rental housing in greater Minnesota. Again, 0% deferred loans. We use this a lot to partner with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Rural Development, Rural Housing Service 515 portfolio. These are privately owned buildings that oftentimes are the most affordable units in communities all across the state. And our ability to help preserve those to affordability and keep the USDA rental assistance in those is really a critical piece of what we do. Our big state preservation program is what we call PARIF. We've called it PARIF for so long. Preservation of Affordable Rental Investment Fund, perhaps? Okay, close enough. But this is really about how we make sure that the HUD-funded Section 8 units don't go out of affordability, and we keep the HUD rental assistance in the state, as well as pairing up with the rural development USDA properties. And this is a lot of units. And I say that mainly because when we were thinking about what might have been the impact on a pause on federal funding, the idea that we have hundreds of thousands of people living in federally subsidized programs, I think that put stress into the lives of all those folks. What does this mean? What does this mean for me? It was with great relief on Monday morning that my multifamily team let me know that HUD had deposited $23 million in our bank account, as they do on the first business day of every month, so that we can help pay the rent in the HUD project-based rental assistance programs that we help administer for HUD.
Commissioner, have you received any guidance from HUD that you expect that will continue now that Elon Musk and his interns, I guess, I don't know, are entering code into the Treasury Department payment fund, as was reported this morning? Have you received any guidance or guarantees from HUD that those payments will continue to come on time?
Chair Port, we did receive something from the Federal Housing Administration. So when we do single-family mortgages, that is a partnership with the FHA, that they weren't impacted, but we received so many conflicting communications, sometimes even in one day, that I'm not confident that anything that we've heard is protective. We don't have a sitting HUD secretary yet. And I will refrain from commenting on Mr. Musk.
If you could keep us informed if any of that guidance comes, that would be great.
I mean, we're tracking the cadence of our receipt of funds from the federal government. We have a lot of selections that we have made in previous years that have not closed their financing and begun construction or completed construction yet, that do tie up federal home and National Housing Trust Fund dollars, as well as low-income housing tax credits and private activity bonds. So there's a lot of stuff that we have committed to in the past that will require HUD and Treasury's partnership going forward. And yes, we are, let's just say we're being super vigilant right now about what we expect. We also have some awards that were made by HUD where we didn't have an executed contract, and we have some renewals with HUD where we don't have everything flowing on the renewal. So there's a number of things that we're watching very, very closely. But back to slide 19. We get $5.5 million for rehab loans for single family. These are loans up to $37,500 to make improvements in owner-occupied housing. Local units of government, nonprofits, CAP agencies help deliver on these programs, and you can see the eligible uses there. I also say that this is an area where I run a bank over here, so we use resources that are earned by the bank to help supplement this program. Moving to the category of increasing housing stability, these are the 5 programs that I will cover next. We're still calling it Bring It Home Rental Assistance because we thought that was a pretty good tagline. And so we are in the process of standing this up. We expect it will support 5,000 renters, and you target it towards cost burden renters, going back to some of Ann's earlier slides, at or below 50% of area median income, with a priority to those at or below 30% of area median income, and you also target it towards families with children. And this, again, is going to be administered by the same people who administer HUD housing choice vouchers, should they choose to opt into the program. The Family Homeless Prevention and Assistance Program helps people stay in their homes and helps people get out of homelessness. This is a program that received several large infusions over the last couple of years, so staying at base is actually going to feel like substantially less funding, especially since the people that operate that are already rationing the resources, even when there was a huge infusion of new funds in the program. The Housing Trust Fund is also rental assistance to low-income families and operating subsidies to property owners. This is a deeply targeted program. If you take a look at just the median income of the households served in the green bar, deeply, deeply targeted program. Homework Starts with Home. This is a great partnership between folks who promote housing stability for families, working with kids in schools, and really trying to demonstrate that when a highly mobile family is stabilized, that it also limits school mobility, which is good for school performance for kids. And then the last in this category is the Bridges program. This was really, kind of intended to be a bridge to the Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher Program. Just really, really important, especially because it targets people with a serious mental illness. I chair the Olmsted Subcabinet, the right of people with disabilities to live, work, and play in the most integrated setting possible in the community of their choice, and this is one of the tools that we have to do that. Supporting and strengthening homeownership. There are 2 ways that you invest in this. One is $1.8 million a year in down payment assistance. This is an area where the agency puts a whole bunch of additional money into this. Obviously, homeownership, closing the homeownership gap for households of color, really making sure that people are set up to succeed when they buy a home is really, really, really important. And then the Homeownership Education, Counseling, and Training Program. This is really about helping people who didn't come from homeowners in their family maybe, are a bit frightened by the home buying process, but really an opportunity for them to work with folks to help them understand if homeownership is right for them. And take a look in the green bar. I mean, it's a modest lift per household with a lot of reach into communities of color. And then we do capacity building grants to support community-based and statewide organizations in work that helps strengthen the housing ecosystem. I think I'll just leave that at that for now. And then the last thing I just wanted to mention is we do work in the public housing space on preservation. In the last couple of years with appropriated dollars, but historically with GEO bonds. And that's just a really important part of the system. We've already received 58 responses for over $100 million for the upcoming RFP and an intent to apply that we did. So, Chair, we will be oversubscribed. That's what I have to say on the state's budget. Do you want to pause here before we shift? And I am noticing I had prepared some responses to some questions from Senator Lucero, but I see that he has had to step away. So I'll just take your guidance on how you want to proceed.
Let's try to go through these last few slides.
Okay.
And if folks have questions, jump in. If we run out of time, we will certainly make time for you to come back and talk with us. And I will follow up with Senator Lucero as well to make sure that he can be here. Or if it would be easier for you to put those answers into writing for he and I as well. Senator Draheim.
Thank you, Chair. You know, one thing I've heard twice now, and one of the testifiers mentioned it today, was that they were told from your agency there was a liquidity issue. And that's very alarming. And I'd love to hear what kind of your side of that is and what is happening. So I'll leave it at that, leave it really open-ended if I could, Chair.
Commissioner?
Chair Port and Senator Draheim, thanks for the question. I was thinking about the famous line, water, water everywhere, and not a drop to drink, because it certainly is not the case that the agency hasn't had an enormous amount of cash on hand because of the big investments that you've made. I think liquidity can sound scary. It's just kind of a fact of life sometimes in a bank. In fact, the agency faced some liquidity issues under Commissioner Mark's tenure quite a while ago. It's a bit cyclical, and it's a result of our success. And the market conditions that are really outside of our control. So let me just see if I can condense this down. We could probably do an hour on liquidity, and my guess is that's not how you want to spend the hour today, but let me see if I can do a primer on liquidity. When I started the agency, had a lot of cash on hand, and we put that money to work. We put that money to work through expanded lending in our home buying portfolio, our home improvement portfolio, our construction loans in the single-family space, our construction loans and our first mortgages in multifamily, and we expanded to do financing in manufactured home communities, as Tori referenced. We did it through some unique funds, partnership with Habitat for Humanity Twin Cities, partnership around NOAA with Greater Minnesota Housing Fund. Like, we put that money to work. And interest rates rose. And the home buying market changed. So we used to get prepayment on loans in a pretty regular cycle, which helped feed our cash flow. So you buy a home with me, interest rates were so low, maybe you refinanced, you prepaid. You bought a home through Minnesota Housing, you decided to buy another home, you paid us back. So we had a pretty decent and predictable prepayment speed before interest rates reached 7%. As interest rates climbed, we saw a decline in prepayment speed. It's not bad, right? I mean, I worry about what's happening in the home ownership market. I worry about what's happening in the home buying market. But because the agency gets earnings over the whole life of a mortgage, it sets the agency up to have earnings for decades to come. It's just that the market conditions changed prepayment speed, and we didn't have the same level of cash coming back into the agency. You basically want a little bit more cash coming back into the agency as cash going out. That inverted. And so, we've had to take a look at some of the discretionary things that we've done, and we're taking a look at some other kind of programmatic structures. Once upon a time, for example, the agency budgeted how much down payment assistance it would do in a given year, and if it reached that budget, we would just stop. We don't think a start, stop is good for a home buyer, to not know whether or not we'll have resources available. So we're trying to figure out, what are the tools that we have in terms of how we raise capital, how we deploy capital, how we use the secondary markets to make sure that we're maximizing capital. But we're just at this moment where the confluence of interest rates, prepayment speed, having highly deployed the cash that we had on hand, just means that some of the things that we said yes to, we're having to say pause to, and I don't even want to use the word pause this week. I mean, it's still good activity. But it's just, I run a bank and I don't print money. If you would like to give me the authority to, to have the ability to tap unlimited resources, we could do that, but I run a bank, and it's just, it's a result of all of these things happening at once.
Senator Draheim?
Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you, Chair. I love that you're maximizing the resources you're given. I'm glad you are, so that isn't where I'm going with this. But it is concerning to me if the legislative body allocates so much funds for a certain use and they can't be distributed because they're being used for something else. And I guess that is my concern, and I know we don't have time today I would like to understand it better. I think the committee needs to understand that better. So on one hand, I'm applauding you for doing what you're doing, but I'm also concerned with the other hand that, the funds that we're saying go to X use, if it's 10 million or 2 million or 1 million, whatever it is, they should be used for that and not something else. So Chair, I hope we can continue this. I know our time is up today. Thank you for having everybody in today that you did. Good discussion all the way around, but I think this needs to be unpacked a little bit more. So thank you.
Commissioner, do you want to respond quickly? And
Chair, Senator, absolutely, because I don't want it to be left on the sense that that's the case. It's not at all the case. Every program that you allocated, the agency is standing up. These were agency resources, not legislative investments that we were choosing to use for helping with a cooperative purchase of manufactured home parks, the communities in which folks lived. It was something we hadn't done. It was something that we were doing. It wasn't something that you gave us money for a specific purpose. We would never not implement funds you gave us for a specific purpose for that purpose. And if we were to ever find ourselves in a situation where there was some obstacle to our doing it, we would absolutely be in dialogue with you immediately on that. So I just want you to know that that was a discretionary agency activity that we were doing over here with the bank. And because we just are in this unique moment of liquidity, it's because of our success. And it's not bad. It's just a different place relative to our liquidity. We've had to pause on that agency discretionary activity that does not use any money from the legislature unless the legislative money is woven into the deal, like an infrastructure investment to a cooperative that's doing a purchase.
thank you, Commissioner. I think there is, further discussion that we will have about all of these things. Senator Housley.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I was hoping that Commissioner Ho could come back because some of those questions that Lucero sent were some of our questions too that we would like answers to. So if she could come back, that would be great.
Absolutely, Senator Housley. Commissioner, if you're willing to join us again, we'd love to have you back soon. And I think one of the things that I would love for us to be able to talk about together, specifically in this liquidity space, is there anything that the legislature can do to, at the legislative level to sort of reform the practices around administration or anything else that we are directing that could ease or make it more efficient or quicker to be able to get programs up and running and be able to have less of an impact on the agency? Would love to have that conversation because I think flexibility is going to be critical in these next few years, particularly as we go from $1 billion to not $1 billion. Still not content with base funding, but I know we're not going to be anywhere near the $1 billion ballpark. And I think that that's going to be a difficult reality for the entire state of Minnesota. For the agency, it's going to be a big change. For our partners, it's going to be a big change. And for folks who've been relying on these programs that were one-time money, that we're able to help for a moment, it's also going to be a big change. And I think as we can all together think about how we're going to manage the uncertainty of what that's going to look like together, I think that would be the place I would love to focus the conversation and make sure that we're doing everything possible to make sure that the money that we are able to appropriate is reaching the very farthest, which I know you share that same vision for our work together. But I agree, we would love to have you back soon. Courtney will reach out to get that scheduled so that we can go through the rest of the questions, but also talk about how are we going to face this cliff that we knew was coming. I keep asking our fiscal chair for another $1 billion, but I don't think that's likely. So, I think that would be a great place to focus our conversation moving forward. But I appreciate everyone's engagement. Senator Abler, did you want to add something? I saw you had your hand up.
I'm just going to re-ask my rhetorical question. Are we paying for the wrong things? Is that what you heard my question before? I'm not convinced that some of these 16 developer, I don't care what their title is, but when you have all these middlemen, middle people having a piece of the pie, and when just in the same neighborhood, the same town, for a third more, you get a way lousier place. So that's all. I'll just leave it at that. I'm interested in that too, besides HOAs and companies like Dominion that take advantage of seniors. So thank you.
We'll absolutely be having those conversations as well, Senator Abler. A topic you and I share some frustration on. Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Mr. Kitzberger. Appreciate your time as always.
So we're not going to do the federal funds?
I think we're going to pause for today.
Okay.
And
I want you to know your whole schedule is on my calendar. So unless
Perfect.
I am out of the state and can't get back.
I think we have a standing commissioners
nothing delights
in the
me more,
room.
Chair.
Thank you all very much. And as we are past time, we will adjourn for today. Thank you.